Welcome to the deep dive. So, if you're operating globally, you know this constant push and pull, right? You need that consistent brand identity everywhere. But you also absolutely have to sound authentic, like you belong in each specific place. Today, we're really diving deep into that tension. We're looking at international PR, global media outreach, and we're trying to figure out, using your source material, how companies keep one strong voice across, dozens of really different markets.
Yeah, and that tension hits you right away. You might craft this amazing campaign, something that just nails it in a place like New York. Super competitive, direct market, right?
All right.
But then you take that exact same message, blast it out to Tokyo, maybe Dubai,
Yeah.
and suddenly you're looking at being irrelevant, confusing, or honestly, sometimes even deeply offensive.
And that difference, that gap between hitting the mark and completely missing it globally, that seems to be why localization is such a huge focus in the materials we looked at. It's way more than just swapping out words, isn't it?
Oh, absolutely. It's not just translation at all. Localization, it's really a strategic approach. It means creating communication that understands and respects cultural differences, it adapts to what people prefer regionally, and it speaks to local issues directly. See, if you just change the language, you're still kind of shouting a message at a market. Localization, that's about actually having a conversation with the community.
Okay, let's unpack this then. If a company has this unified global mission, this core identity, why isn't it enough to just, tweak a press release a bit for each country? Where are companies still fundamentally kind of dropping the ball and showing that lack of effort you mentioned?
Well, they drop the ball because they don't fully grasp that people process information differently, they value things differently, they even communicate based on, fundamentally different cultural blueprints. So if you just send out generic stuff, content that hasn't really been tailored, it signals disrespect, basically. That says you, this local audience, you're an afterthought.
Okay, so let's get specific then. Beyond just the words, what are some of those really high-stakes cultural things that absolutely demand adaptation, like radical adaptation sometimes?
Well, you've got visuals. The core value proposition needs tweaking. Sometimes even the spokesperson choice matters hugely. And timing, of course. But honestly, the most surprising one where people often slip up is probably the visual stuff. Colors, imagery.
Okay, tell me more about that, because I think, the default assumption is visuals are pretty universal, right?
Yeah, and that assumption can be really dangerous. The sources point out, for instance, the color white. In many Western cultures, it signifies, purity, weddings, new beginnings.
Standard stuff.
But in many Asian cultures, white is the color of mourning. So imagine rolling out a global product launch. Maybe the whole campaign aesthetic is built around white. And you launch that across Southeast Asia without changing a thing. That one seemingly small visual choice, it can completely kill the campaign's emotional connection. And it goes for everything, hand gestures and photos, design styles, you name it.
Getting those details right, though, that must build trust instantly. I also saw that the actual structure of the message, the story you tell, needs to change based on core cultural values.
Absolutely. Think about collectivism versus individualism. In societies that are highly collectivist, Japan, South Korea, for example, your message has to hit different notes. You emphasize community benefits, group harmony, how this thing helps the whole group. That lands powerfully there.
But if you take that exact same message and try it in, say, the US or Australia, highly individualistic markets, you have to completely pivot, don't you? It becomes about personal success, innovation, what I get out of it.
Precisely. The whole story framework shifts. It's me versus we. And then there's timing, like we touched on. Launching something big during, say, Ramadan or Chinese New Year or even major local elections. It's such a tightrope. You have to show real awareness, get it wrong, and you just look ignorant, clumsy. Even the style of storytelling matters. Some audiences want hard data, facts first. Others connect way better with emotional, relationship-driven stories.
Okay, so we've got the cultural foundation laid out, but the pitfalls aren't just about concepts. They get really tactical, right? Which brings us to maybe the biggest tactical issue, the translation trap. We know machine translation, AI, it's not enough. But why, structurally, is relying on those tools for things like press materials such a potential disaster?
Well, first off, they just miss the cultural context.
Yeah.
The nuance, the emotional tone you need for PR to actually persuade someone. But beyond that, language itself creates these technical headaches for layout and design. Take German, for instance. When you translate from English to German, the text typically expands, sometimes by around 30%.
Wow, 30%. So that carefully crafted, punchy 150-word English press release, suddenly in German, it's way too long, it looks bloated, it breaks the layout.
Exactly. Or flip it, Chinese characters condense information incredibly efficiently. So your English text might suddenly look sparse or underdeveloped in Chinese.
Oh.
You absolutely have to adjust the content length, the style, everything. But, we're talking about truly embarrassing basic tactical mistakes.
Mm-hmm.
We have to talk about regional conventions. That's a minefield.
Okay, give me an example. What's the most basic but potentially most catastrophic tactical error you see companies make when they're trying to globalize something like a simple document or even just a meeting invite?
Dates. Date formats. It sounds so simple. It's almost painful, right? But think about, say, 03/04/2024. If you send that out globally without specifying. In the U.S., that's March 4th.
Right, month first.
But in most of Europe and tons of other places, it's April 3rd, day first. Now, if that date is for a product launch or a critical deadline in a crisis, you've just created absolute chaos.
Yeah, that's a nightmare waiting to happen. And it probably extends to things like idioms too, right? Using phrases like think outside the box or maybe a local sports metaphor.
Totally. They often translate terribly or just leave people confused because the cultural context is missing. And this is all before you even get to simple things like measurements, miles versus kilometers, or currency conventions. Where does the symbol go? What do you use for the decimal separator? A comma, a period. These tiny details, they instantly signal whether your content was actually localized properly or just, lazily adapted.
Okay, let's shift to getting the message out there, media customization. The platform matters just as much as the message itself. You could have the perfect tech announcement for, say, TechCrunch in the US, but that's basically useless for a major financial paper like Les Echos in France or Nikkei in Japan, isn't it?
Exactly. Local journalists, they expect, and frankly, they deserve material that's tailored specifically for their market, their readers. That means you need to weave in region-specific data. You need local customer examples, success stories, and you need to reframe those big global announcements to make them relevant locally.
So, if a company puts out its global quarterly earnings report, you can't just send the same raw numbers everywhere. For each market, you need to dig in and maybe highlight local job creation figures from that report, or regional investment, community impact. Basically, pull out the angles that actually matter to that specific readership.
Yes. And when you do that extra work, your reward is much higher pickup rates. You stop just mass emailing and start actually building relationships, showing you respect the local journalist's beat.
Okay, so you've tailored the content. Now you need to get it out effectively. What kind of distribution strategy works best for balancing broad reach with that crucial local credibility, especially when platforms vary so much?
The sources really point towards a hybrid approach. It seems to be key. Use the big global wire services that give you broad, fast coverage. But critically, you must pair them with local distribution partners for precision and trust. So, for example, you might use a major global wire, but also work directly with, say, Jupa in Germany, the German news agency, or Kyo News in Japan. You get the reach, plus that instant local credibility boost.
And platform relevance itself is just wildly different. We lean so heavily on LinkedIn here in North America for professional stuff, B2B, but in China, for many professionals, WeChat is the primary channel, right?
Absolutely. Or think about Latin America. WhatsApp and Facebook are often huge drivers of engagement, even for business. In Russia, you're looking at vKontakte, Telegram being really key for professionals. Your whole content strategy has to map onto those local digital habits. And even the timing needs to match how people consume media locally. Morning news in Tokyo is a completely different beast from evening browsing habits in Sao Paulo.
We also need to think about the format of digital content, too. Japanese audiences often prefer really detailed, text-heavy content, apparently, whereas maybe in Brazil, it's much more about visual storytelling. So your digital strategy can't be one size fits all.
Exactly. And underlying all of this is the need for proper localized SEO. Just translating keywords. Not good enough. You have to research the local search engines people actually use. Maybe it's Baidu, Yandex, Naver, not just Google. And crucially, understand that even within the same language, search terms differ. The Spanish term someone uses in Mexico might be quite different from those used in Spain for the exact same product.
Okay, let's shift gears to the absolute highest stakes situation. Crisis communication across borders. Speed is essential in a crisis, obviously, but getting the cultural appropriateness right, that seems like it could be the difference between recovery and, well, total brand meltdown.
It is the ultimate tightrope walk, isn't it? You need speed, but you also need sensitivity. This means having robust, culturally informed crisis plans ready before anything happens. You need to engage local PR teams immediately, right from the start, to help craft statements that resonate properly in that specific market. And you have to understand that attitudes towards things like Accountability, apologies,
Yeah.
they're definitely not universal.
So take a big global brand, maybe like Starbucks. They've had situations where they needed to issue very direct apologies in the U.S. market. Why might that direct, maybe even assertive American style of apology need complete rethinking when dealing with similar issues in, say, Asian markets?
Well, because in many Asian markets, cultural norms place a huge emphasis on face, on saving face, both for the individual and the group. And communication tends to be more indirect, so a very direct, perhaps legally vetted apology that works fine in the West. It might come across as aggressive, maybe even defensive elsewhere. You often need a more subtle shift in tone, maybe leaning more towards conciliation, formality. Sometimes, depending on what the local experts advise, even strategic silence or a delayed response might be the culturally smarter move. The core message, the facts, the company's values that stays consistent. But the delivery, the execution, has to align with local cultural expectations, especially when the brand is vulnerable.
Okay, so this points to a structural challenge. We need that central control for brand safety, for the core message. But we absolutely need that local freedom, that local expertise for the communication to actually land authentically. How do organizations manage this? How do they keep this inherent tension from just turning into, like, internal battles?
You manage it through structure, but specifically through structural balance.
Yeah.
You absolutely need a centralized management team. That's non-negotiable. They safeguard the brand, they set the core narrative, they ensure everyone's pulling towards the same overall goals. They own the sort of source code of the message.
But the teams on the ground, the ones actually doing the work in each market, they need real power, right? Not just acting like glorified translators.
Exactly. You need empowered market-specific teams.
As a
Truly empowered. They bring that irreplaceable local knowledge. They have the media relationships. They provide the authentic voice that HQ just physically cannot replicate from afar. The real challenge often is getting the central team to genuinely trust the local team's judgment on those subtle nuances.
Okay, here's where it gets really interesting. Practically speaking, what are the mechanisms? How do you actually connect these central and local teams so they're not just operating in separate bubbles?
Yeah, the secret sauce seems to be coordination and, importantly, shared metrics that make sense. This means things like having regular alignment meetings where local teams can really voice regional needs and insights. Using shared digital workspaces helps collaboration, obviously. And, maybe most critical, defining clear approval processes. Processes that allow local teams enough autonomy to act fast when needed, especially in PR, while still having guardrails to protect the global brand. And performance metrics, they have to reflect both the global KPIs and the specific realities of penetrating that local market. If you only measure global success, you actually disincentivize the hard work of localization.
This has been such a detailed look at a really complex global puzzle. I think the big takeaway here is crystal clear. Localization isn't just a task you check off a list, like translation. It's a fundamental commitment, isn't it, to building real connections, fostering trust, and showing genuine cultural respect.
Exactly. And if we connect this to the bigger picture, the ultimate aim isn't just to be in a foreign market. It's to create content, create communication that feels native there. Like it was genuinely designed for that audience, maybe even by that audience. Because your message feels foreign, it's going to be treated like it's foreign, ignored, maybe.
That's the real measure of success then. Does it feel like it belongs?
Right. And this whole framework, it applies whether you're a giant multinational or, a small startup just expanding into your second country. Don't wait until you're huge to start thinking about localization. Start testing localized approaches now. Look at your website bounce rates, your conversion patterns, but look at them separately. For each market, don't just lump it all together. Let that specific local beta guide how you refine your strategy continuously. You really have to give the markets you want to serve your full attention, your cultural respect. If you don't, you're just not going to engage them properly. So thinking about your own work, what specific idiom or maybe what visual element are you going to run through a localization test first for your next global message?